We're going to take a look at categorical variables. We're going to first of all start out by looking at what do we do when we have just one categorical variable, and then what do we do when we end up having two categorical variables that we're trying to describe. So we start out with our population. We take that sample, a random sample, we collect some data from that sample, and then we want to make an inference about the population. But before we can make that inference about our population, we need to do some descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics is really just where we're trying to summarize and visualize what's going on between our variables. Now, what type of summary that you use or visualization that you use depends upon the variable or variables that you're using. If you're using one categorical or two categorical or one quantitative or two quantitative or a categorical with a quantitative. Whichever one you have, you're going to have a different approach. So let's take a look at this. We have the survey. We want to know what kind of phones people are using. Well, here is our results. It's a frequency table. There were 458 people that had an Android phone, 437 people that had an iPhone, 924 people that did not have a smartphone, and so on, with our total at the bottom. So this is a frequency table. Now, we're often wanting to look at the proportion. To figure out that proportion, you take the count, or how many were in that category, divided by the total size of our sample. Now, if we're getting that proportion from our sample, we refer to that as p hat. It's got a little bit of a hat on top. If it's a proportion referring to our population, it's just p. So if it's got a hat on top, it's for our sample. So what proportion of adults do not have a cell phone? So that proportion from our sample, so p hat, is no cell phone is 293 out of the total, which is 2,253, which is about 0.13, or about 13%. Now, whether you use a proportion or a percentage is really up to you. It can be done either way. So here is our relative frequency table for our phones. Notice the no cell phone we said was 0.13. We would do the same type of stuff for each one of these. We would have taken how many Android phones we had, which was 458, divided by the total, and that's where we got this number. And we did that for each category. All these numbers here of our proportions always need to add up to 1. Or if you were dealing with percentages, they'd have to add up to 100%. So let's look at water preferences. What kind of water would you prefer? And it was a blinded study. So in other words, if I can talk here, sorry about that, the participants did not know what kind of water they were getting. And below we have our table. We have tap water, and then we have 3 other choices of different waters you can buy. And underneath is, you'll notice 10 people preferred the tap water. Sam's choice was 24 people, and so on. So here's our frequency table. If we add all these together, we get the total number. Now we could go ahead and do a relative frequency table by figuring out our proportions for each one, and that's what we have down below. We took 10 for the tap divided by the total, and that gives us 0.1. Aquafina, we take 25 divided by the total, which we get 0.25. So that's how we go about figuring out our preference or our proportions. Now, We could do a bar chart, sometimes referred to as a bar plot or a bar graph. But a bar plot is just basically where the height of each bar corresponds to the count that was in that category. So for the Android phone, which was 458, the height of that bar goes up to 458. On the left side here, this is count. How many are in that bar? So when we looked at the non-smartphones, that was 923. That's the height of this bar. It corresponds to a height over here of 923 on the side. Now, if we were doing a bar chart where this was the relative frequency over here, it would look the same, except the numbers on the side would be different. They'd be the numbers from 0 all the way up to 1 with our proportions there. When we're also, another way to display this data, besides having a visual representation as a bar plot, we can do a pie chart where each piece of the pie represents the proportion. So we'll notice our non-smartphone was the largest, that had 930 or 23 out of the total. That was our largest, and that's why it ends up being the biggest piece of the pie. Our Android, which was 458 out of the total, that proportion is our percent of the area of our circle right here. So you can see, looking at this, that the Android and the iPhone were about equal. And remember, Android was 458, the iPhone was 432. Their proportions are about the same when you divide them out. And then also, this BlackBerry with no cell phone, if you'd put those together, that would also be about the same. Do they always have to be the same? No, but in this case, the data ended up giving us information that was about that. Now, this can be done with StatKey, and StatKey is one of the websites that we're going to be using a lot in this class. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.